Hi, I'm Jim Ward of the Middle Country Public Library, and I'd like to welcome you to another episode in our History Bites series. Today we will be discussing the Lewis and Clark Expedition, which was the United States expedition to cross the newly acquired western portion of the country after the Louisiana Purchase. Meriwether Lewis was born in Virginia in 1774, but spent his early childhood in Georgia. He returned to Virginia as a teenager to receive his education and graduated from college in 1793. He then joined the Virginia State Militia, where he helped to put down the Whiskey Rebellion and later became a captain in the U.S. Army. At age 27, he became personal secretary to President Thomas Jefferson. William Clark was born in Virginia in 1770, but moved with his family to Kentucky at age 15. At age 19, he joined the state militia and then the regular army, where he served with Lewis and was eventually commissioned by President George Washington as a lieutenant of infantry. In 1796, Clark returned home to manage his family's estate. 7 years later, Lewis chose him to embark on an epic excursion that would help shape America's history. During the French and Indian War, France surrendered a large part of Louisiana to Spain, and almost all of its remaining lands to Great Britain. Initially, Spain's acquisition didn't have a major impact since it still allowed the United States to travel the Mississippi River and use New Orleans as a trade port. Then, Napoleon Bonaparte took power in France in 1799 and wanted to regain France's former territory in the United States. In 1802, King Charles IV of Spain returned the Louisiana Territory to France, and America's port access was revoked. In 1803, under the threat of war, President Jefferson and James Monroe successfully negotiated a deal with France to purchase the Louisiana Territory, which included about 827,000 square miles, for $15 million. Even before negotiations with France were finished, Jefferson asked Congress to finance an expedition to survey the lands of the so-called Louisiana Purchase. The Lewis and Clark expedition began in 1804 when President Thomas Jefferson tasked Meriwether Lewis with exploring lands west of the Mississippi River. Lewis knew that exploring the Louisiana Territory would be no small task and began preparations immediately. He studied medicine, botany, astronomy, and zoology, and scrutinized existing maps and journals of the region. He also asked his friend Clark to co-command the expedition. Even though Clark was once Lewis's superior, Lewis was technically in charge of the trip, but for all intents and purposes, the two shared equal responsibility. On July 5, 1803, Lewis visited the arsenal at Harper's Ferry to obtain munitions. He then rowed a custom-made 55-foot keelboat, also called the boat or the barge, down the Ohio River and joined Clark in Clarksville, Indiana. From there, Clark took the boat up the Mississippi River while Lewis continued along on horseback to collect additional supplies. Some of the supplies collected were surveying instruments including compasses, quadrants, telescopes, sextants, a chronometer, and camping supplies. Lewis also collected oilcloth, steel flints, tools, utensils, cornmeal, mosquito netting, fishing equipment, soap and salt, clothing, weapons and ammunition, medicines and medical supplies, books on botany, geography and astronomy, and maps. Lewis entrusted Clark to recruit men for their Corps of Volunteers for Northwest Discovery. Throughout the winter of 1803 and 1804, Clark recruited and trained men at Camp Du Bois north of St. Louis, Missouri. He chose unmarried, healthy men who were good hunters and knew survival skills. The expedition party included 45 souls, including Lewis, Clark, 27 unmarried soldiers, a French Indian interpreter, a contracted boat crew, and a slave owned by Clark named York. On May 14, 1804, Clark and the Corps joined Lewis in St. Charles, Missouri, and headed upstream on the Missouri River in the keelboat and two smaller boats at a rate of about 15 miles per day. Heat, swarms of insects, and strong river currents made the trip arduous at best. On August 20th, 22-year-old Corps member Sergeant Charles Floyd died of an abdominal infection, possibly from appendicitis. He was the only member of the Corps to die on their journey. Most of the land Lewis and Clark surveyed was already occupied by Native Americans. In fact, the Corps encountered around 50 Native American tribes, including the Shoshone, the Mandan, the Minotari, the Blackfeet, the Chinook, and the Sioux. Lewis and Clark developed a first contact protocol for meeting new tribes. They bartered goods and presented the tribe's leader with a Jefferson Indian Peace Medal, a coin engraved with the image of Thomas Jefferson on one side and an image of two hands clasped beneath a tomahawk and a peace pipe with the inscription "Peace and Friendship" on the other. In August, Lewis and Clark held peaceful Indian councils with the Oto near present-day Council Bluffs, Iowa, and the Yankton Sioux at present-day Yankton, South Dakota. In late September, however, they encountered the Teton Sioux, who weren't as accommodating and tried to stop the Corps' boats and demanded a toll payment. But they were no match for the military might of the Corps and soon moved on. In November 1804, the expedition constructed a winter encampment near the Mandan Indian villages. Quickly named Fort Mandan, it was located near what is now Washburn, North Dakota. Lewis and Clark used this opportunity to cull out members of the expedition, selecting the most reliable, hardy, and talented men to continue, and sending the rest back to St. Louis with numerous plant and animal samples, as well as a lengthy report to Jefferson. Lewis concluded that report optimistically, writing, quote, "I can foresee no material or probable obstruction to our progress, and entertain therefore the most sanguine hopes of complete success. At this moment, every individual of the party are in good health and excellent spirits, zealously attached to the enterprise and anxious to proceed. With such men I have everything to hope and but little to fear." End quote. While at Fort Mandan, Lewis and Clark met French-Canadian trapper Toussaint Charbonneau and hired him as an interpreter. They allowed his pregnant Shoshone Indian wife Sacagawea to join him on the expedition. She had been kidnapped by Hidatsa Indians at age 12 and then sold to Charbonneau. Lewis and Clark hoped she could help them communicate with any Shoshone they encountered on their journey. On February 11, 1805, Sacagawea gave birth to a son and named him Jean-Baptiste. She became an invaluable and respected asset for Lewis and Clark. In the summer of 1805, the expedition reached the headwaters of the Missouri River in the Rocky Mountains, and then located the nearby headwaters of the Columbia. It was near the Missouri perhaps, but not directly connected as Jefferson had hoped. As Lewis immediately realized, there was no Northwest Passage. After completing a lengthy and arduous overland passage through the Rocky Mountains, the expedition quickly descended the Columbia River, reaching the Pacific Ocean on November 15, 1805. When Clark erroneously thought he had sighted the Pacific on November 7th, he wrote a passage in his journal that captured the sentiment within the expedition. Quote, "Great joy in camp, we are in view of the ocean, this great Pacific Ocean which we have been so long anxious to see." End quote. Later that month, the expedition built a winter encampment, Fort Clatsop, located a few miles from what is now Astoria, Oregon. It was not an easy winter at Fort Clatsop. Everyone struggled to keep themselves and their supplies dry and fought an ongoing battle with tormenting fleas and other insects. Almost everyone was weak and sick with stomach problems, likely caused by bacterial infections, hunger, or influenza-like symptoms. The party departed for the return trip on March 23, 1806. Drawing on the geographic knowledge they had acquired during their travels west, the expedition made an efficient return trip, reaching St. Louis just 6 months later, on September 23rd. The party then dispersed. Lewis and Clark soon left for Washington, enjoying celebratory gatherings along the way, before finally reporting personally to Jefferson. Both Lewis and Clark received double pay and 1,600 acres of land for their efforts. Lewis was made governor of the Louisiana Territory, and Clark was appointed Brigadier General of Militia for Louisiana Territory and a federal Indian agent. While they had failed to identify a coveted Northwest Passage water route across the continent, they had completed their mission of surveying the Louisiana Territory from the Mississippi River to the Pacific Ocean, and did so against tremendous odds with just one death and little violence. The Corps had traveled more than 8,000 miles, produced invaluable maps and geographical information, identified at least 120 animal specimens and 200 botanical samples, and initiated peaceful relations with dozens of Native American tribes. The duo and their crew, with the aid of Sacagawea and other Native Americans, helped strengthen America's claim to the West and inspired countless other explorers and Western pioneers. I'd like to thank you all for joining us for today's episode. If you enjoyed it, click like, and if you watched on YouTube, hit subscribe. Thanks so much, and we'll see you all next time.